Namaste and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why, and how of newspaper reading. Today we would be analyzing the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper of 19 July 2018. Now let us begin. Now we'll begin today by first understanding as to what is a no confidence motion, and we'll try to understand this from the perspective of your prelims examination. Now the Constitution of India does not mention a no confidence motion. However, Article 75, Clause 3 of the Indian Constitution is that the Council of Ministers, meaning the Prime Minister and his cabinet, shall be collectively responsible to the House of the People, which means the Lok Sabha. And this Article 75 Clause 3 implies that the majority of the Lok Sabha MPs must not be against the Prime Minister and his cabinet. Now, an important aspect that you should understand from this is that the no confidence motion is moved in the Lok Sabha and not in the Rajya Sabha. So now hopefully up till here you've understood that the Constitution does not mention a no confidence motion. However, under Article 75 Clause 3, it states that the Council of Ministers, meaning the Prime Minister and his cabinet, shall be collectively responsible to the House of the People or the Lok Sabha. And therefore this implies that the majority of the Lok Sabha MPs must not be against the Prime Minister and his or her cabinet. And therefore an important aspect for you to remember is that a no confidence motion is moved in the Lok Sabha and cannot be moved in the Rajya Sabha. Now the Lok Sabha rules specify the procedure for motion of no confidence, wherein any Lok Sabha member may give a written notice of no confidence to the Lok Sabha Speaker. And the Speaker, after accepting this notice, shall introduce the no confidence motion in Lok Sabha. And 50 members of Parliament in favour are required for the acceptance of this no confidence motion. And if accepted by the required number of MPs, a motion of no confidence has to be taken up within 10 days. And if the no confidence motion is then passed, the Council of Ministers, meaning the Prime Minister and his cabinet, must resign from office. So now hopefully up till here you've also understood that the Lok Sabha rules specify the procedure for motion of no confidence, wherein any Lok Sabha member may give a written notice of no confidence to the Lok Sabha Speaker. And if the Lok Sabha Speaker accepts this notice, then the Speaker may introduce the no confidence motion in Lok Sabha, wherein 50 MPs of Lok Sabha have to be in favour for the acceptance of the no confidence motion. And if this written notice of no confidence gets the acceptance of 50 MPs, then a motion of no confidence has to be taken up within 10 days. And if this no confidence motion is passed in the Lok Sabha, then the Council of Ministers, meaning the Prime Minister and his cabinet, must resign. Wherein previously a question has been asked in the prelims of 2014, which had asked to consider the following statements regarding a no confidence motion in India, wherein the first statement states that there is no mention of no confidence motion in the Constitution of India. And from this explanation, you understand that there is no mention of a no confidence motion in the Constitution of India, and therefore the statement 1 is correct. And the second statement states that a motion of no confidence can be introduced in the Lok Sabha only. And similarly, you also understand that a motion of no confidence cannot be introduced in the Rajya Sabha, and therefore the second statement is also correct. And therefore the correct answer to this question would be both 1 and 2. So now hopefully you understand the basics of the no confidence motion. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 12. Now what this article talks about is the 2+2 Ministerial Dialogue between India and the United States. So what we'll do with regards to this article is first understand as to what is the 2+2 Ministerial Dialogue between India and the United States and how is it different from the 2+2 dialogue with Japan and Australia. And after that we'll try to revise the various foundational agreements such as COMCASA that have either been signed between India and the United States or are under negotiations to be signed between India and the United States. So now let us first understand as to what is the 2+2 Ministerial Dialogue. Now this 2+2 Ministerial Dialogue would be held between the Defence and Foreign Ministers of India, and while on the other side, the United States would be represented by the US Secretary of State and the US Secretary of Defence. Now the 2+2 Ministerial Dialogue between India and the United States is likely to take place in the first week of September. Now the 2+2 Ministerial Dialogue between India and the United States is different from the 2+2 dialogue that India has with Japan and Australia. And this 2+2 dialogue that India has with Japan and Australia is conducted between the foreign and the defense secretaries of both nations. So now hopefully you've understood the difference between the 2+2 ministerial dialogue between India and the United States and how it is different from the 2+2 dialogue that India has with Japan and Australia. And moreover, you also understand as to why this article is in the news, wherein the 2+2 ministerial dialogue between India and the United States is scheduled to take place in the first week of September. So now let us understand the various foundational agreements that have been signed between India and the United States or are currently under negotiations between India and the United States. Now what this article talks about is that it provides the focus areas of dialogue during the 2+2 dialogue between India and the United States. Now the main focus areas of the 2+2 ministerial dialogue would be of the foundational agreements that aid the United States in defense cooperation with other countries. Now, the article has highlighted four foundational agreements, of which two India and the United States have already signed. Wherein the first agreement that has already been signed is of the General Security of Military Information Agreement, whose primary mandate is the sharing of intelligence information between India and the United States. Now, the second agreement that has already been signed between India and the United States is the Logistics Exchange Memorandum of Agreement, and this agreement provides the militaries of both countries access to each other's military facilities. And this access is mainly for the purpose of refueling and replenishment. And moreover, you should also understand that this access is not automatic or obligatory in nature. Now, apart from this, the article provides two foundational agreements that are yet to be signed. Now, the first foundational agreement that is yet to be signed, which the article talks about, is the Communications Compatibility and Security Arrangement. And this agreement would facilitate the transfer of encrypted communication systems. And the signing of this agreement is required for India so that India can access the high-tech military US hardware, especially armed drones. And the second agreement that is yet to be signed, which the article talks about, is the Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement. And this agreement would facilitate the exchange of geospatial information, wherein geospatial means the data that can be derived from a particular location. Now, hopefully, up till here, you've understood the two foundational agreements that both India and the United States would be discussing upon at the upcoming 2+2 dialogue. Now, you have to understand that this news is currently in transition, and we'll have to wait and see on how this news moves forward. And now, with regards to your UPSC syllabus, the four foundational agreements would be placed in GS Paper 2 in the International Relations section within the subsection Bilateral Agreements involving and affecting India's interest. And so now with this, we move on to the next article. Now we have taken the lead editorial from page 8. Now what this article talks about is the linguistic diversity of India and how the linguistic diversity of India needs to be properly reflected in the census data. Now this article focuses on the death of a language because of the non-use of that language. And the author is trying to highlight that when a language goes extinct or it is not being used anymore, it is hardly noticed in India. Wherein, according to the author, the disappearance of a language erases the centuries of knowledge that have been gathered by the speaker of those languages. And according to the author, this disappearance of a language is also a form of violence. Now, the author has highlighted one of the reasons for the death of a language, wherein it can be attributed to either a policy shift or a decision of a high official in the government of India. Wherein, according to the author, the 1961 census gave the different languages that were spoken in India, which included around 1,652 mother tongues. However, according to the author, the 1971 census data quoted the mother tongue at 109. And according to the author, the reason for the sudden decrease of the total number of languages that were considered as mother tongues in India was that under the 1971 census, a language that wanted the tag of a mother tongue should have at least 10,000 speakers. And because of this decision of the government of India, it reduced the official count of the languages that were spoken as mother tongues in India. And this is the reason, according to the author, that a policy shift or a decision of a high official can lead to a death of a language. Now, according to the author, the 2011 census data has made public the language data, wherein, according to the 2011 census, 1,369 languages have been considered in the category of recognized languages. However, according to the author, around 19,000 mother tongues were submitted for consideration, and the government officials in India were not able to find logical matches for roughly 18,000 languages, and therefore only 1,369 languages were picked up as mother tongues in India. And according to the author, this left out roughly around 60 lakh Indian citizens who speak different languages, but under the classification regime of the 2011 census data, their linguistic citizenship or them being part of the linguistic diversity of India was not considered. Now, according to the author, these roughly 1300 languages are further classified under 121 group labels. And of these 121 group languages, only 22 languages are included in the 8 schedule, while the remaining 99 have been included in the non scheduled languages. And according to the author, the classification of these languages into 121 labels is form of a forced grouping, when according to the author, these forced groupings do not show the true picture of those languages. Wherein various languages such as Bhojpuri, which is spoken by more than 5 crore people and has its own form of literature, vocabulary, style, and popular media, has been grouped as being part of Hindi. And the author gives further examples of the Kumaoni language of Uttarakhand, the Pawari language of tribals in Maharashtra, and similarly 50 other languages that are spoken around India as part of a mother tongue but have been classified under Hindi. And the author has argued that the census is an important exercise as it reflects the cultural diversity of India, and the collection of the census data should therefore take into account the inclusion of marginal communities, the preservation of India's rich heritage, and nurturing of India's linguistic diversity. So, now hopefully, you've understood the crux of this article that the collection of census data in India needs to safeguard the linguistic diversity of India, wherein within your UPSC examination syllabus, this article and the explanation given in this section would be placed in GS Paper 1 within the section Society and within the subsection Salient Features of Indian Society and Diversity of India, wherein previously a question has been asked in the GS Paper 1 of 2015 on diversity of India, which had asked describe any four cultural elements of diversity in India and rate their relative significance in building of national identity. Wherein a similar question for your practice, describe the concerns in safeguarding the linguistic diversity of India, suggest steps to protect and promote vulnerable languages of India, wherein you can answer a part of this question with the explanation given in this section. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from the editorial page on page 9. Now what we'll do with regards to this article is first revise the 2 plus 1 formula that has been proposed by China and then understand as to what this article talks about. Now what has happened is that China has proposed of a 2 plus 1 dialogue mechanism, wherein 2 would mean India and China and plus 1 would mean any South Asian country. Wherein according to China, the 2 plus 1 dialogue mechanism would not be a trilateral dialogue mechanism. And according to China, in this 2 plus 1 dialogue mechanism, India and China would jointly conduct a dialogue with any third South Asian country. And according to this article, Nepal has agreed to this 2 plus 1 dialogue mechanism. But you have to understand that this news is currently in transition, and we'll have to wait and see as to what would be the response of India to this Chinese proposal of a 2 plus 1 dialogue mechanism. Now the article has highlighted various advantages of the 2 plus 1 mechanism, wherein the first advantage highlighted by the author is that India and China can become joint custodians of shared interest in their neighborhood. The second advantage highlighted in the article is that the 2 plus 1 mechanism can act as a trust building exercise between India and China. And the third and the final advantage given by the author is that the 2 plus 1 mechanism reduces the relevance of the China card, wherein the China card has been used by India's neighbor to pressurize India. Now hopefully up till here you've understood the three advantages that have been highlighted by the author of the 2 plus 1 mechanism, wherein India and China can become the joint custodians of shared interest in their neighborhood. The second advantage highlighted by the author is that the 2 plus 1 mechanism can act as a trust building exercise between India and China. And the third and the final advantage highlighted by the author is that the 2 plus 1 mechanism reduces the relevance of the China card, which has been used by India's neighbors to pressurize India. Now with regards to UPSC syllabus, the 2 plus 1 mechanism would be placed in GS paper 2 within the international relations section, within the subsection India and its neighborhood relations. Now you have to understand that this article only highlights the advantages of the 2 plus 1 mechanism, but it does not highlight the concerns that the 2 plus 1 mechanism brings about. But considering the fact that the news is in transition and India has yet to respond to the 2 plus 1 mechanism, let us wait and see on how it moves forward. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from the editorial page on page 8. Now the reason this article is in the news is because traces of formaldehyde has been found in fish samples from Kerala and Goa. Now the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India has banned the use of formaldehyde in fresh fish. And one of the reasons it has been banned is because formaldehyde is considered as being a carcinogenic, meaning that the consumption of formaldehyde by humans has the possibility of causing cancer. However, according to the article, there is a lack of proper research on the ill effects of formaldehyde, wherein according to the article, there is very little research that states that formaldehyde causes cancer when ingested orally by humans. And therefore, the article provides a suggestion that first, further research is required to understand the ill effects of formaldehyde, especially within the Indian context. Now, you have to consider this article and the explanation given in this section within the aspect of basic understanding of formaldehyde, wherein formaldehyde is used as a preservative for fresh fish, and in various studies, it has been considered as a carcinogenic chemical, and because of which the Food Safety Standards Authority of India has also banned the use of this chemical. However, according to the article, there is a lack of proper research on the ill effects of formaldehyde, wherein according to the article, there is little evidence that formaldehyde causes cancer when ingested orally by humans. And therefore, the article makes a suggestion that further research is required, especially within the Indian context, to study the ill effects of formaldehyde. And therefore, this article and the explanation given in this section should be considered within the aspect of basic understanding of formaldehyde and also within the context of its continuous coverage. And so, now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now, we have taken this article from page 13. Now, you have to understand that there used to be a new exploration licensing policy on NELP, and the Union Cabinet has decided to issue various changes in the contracts that it had signed under the new exploration licensing policy before 1999. Now, the reason why this article is in the news is very specific with regards to the general studies syllabus of your civil services examination. So, what we'll do with regards to this article is try to understand the NELP policy and then again revise the HELP policy or the new hydrocarbon exploration licensing policy. So now let us understand about both of these policies. Now the hydrocarbon exploration and licensing policy was adopted by the Government of India in 2016, and it indicated the new contractual and fiscal model for award of hydrocarbon acreages towards exploration and production. Now this policy is applicable for all future contracts to be awarded. Now the four main points under this policy, wherein the first one is that there would be a uniform license for exploration and production for all forms of hydrocarbon. The second feature of this policy is that it would have an open acreage policy. Now acreage means an extent or area in acres. Now the third feature is that it would have an easy to administer revenue sharing model. And the fourth and the last point is that it would have a marketing and pricing freedom for the crude oil and natural gas produced. Now, hopefully, up till here, you have understood that the hydrocarbon exploration and licensing policy was adopted by the Government of India in 2016 and that it would have a new contractual and fiscal model for award of hydrocarbon acreages for exploration and production. Now, the main features of this policy is that it would have a uniform license for exploration and production for all forms of hydrocarbon. The second feature of this policy is that it would have an open acreage policy, wherein acreage means the extent or an area in acres. The third feature of this policy is that it would have easy to administer revenue sharing model. Now the fourth and the last main feature of this policy is that it would have marketing and pricing freedom for crude oil and natural gas production. Now by all forms of hydrocarbon, it means shale gas or oil gas hydrates, among other both conventional and unconventional oil and gas resources. And this revenue sharing model would be between the company that has undertaken the license and the government of India. Now, the hydrocarbon exploration and licensing policy had replaced the earlier new exploration licensing policy. Now, it replaced the new exploration licensing policy by first having a change in the fiscal model, wherein the new exploration licensing policy was based on the profit sharing model, meaning that the revenue to the government would go after the cost recovery, while under the HELP policy has a revenue sharing model, wherein revenue to the government would be given on production. Now, hopefully, up till here, you have also understood that the hydrocarbon exploration and licensing policy replaced the earlier new exploration licensing policy, and the HELP policy replaced the NELP policy by a change in the fiscal model, wherein the earlier policy had a profit sharing model wherein the government of India gets the revenue after cost recovery, meaning profit from the product itself, while under the new scheme, the government of India gets the revenue on a revenue sharing model on production. And now with this, we come to an end in the analysis of today's newspaper. Now we move on to the question for today.